The hidden pain of living in permanent self-surveillance. Growing up with criticism produces a person who constantly monitors themselves, their gestures, words, emotions, needs, expressions, not because they want to be perfect, but because they were trained to believe that imperfection is dangerous. The coping mechanism that once shielded them, preemptive self-correction, becomes the very force that sabotages their adult peace, confidence, and relationships. This is the guiding psychological archetype of Descript.
There's a moment you know too well, a pause so small no one else notices, right before you speak, right before you share an idea, right before you show even a fraction of who you are, you stop. Not because you don't know what you want to say, but because you're scanning yourself, checking tone, expression, possible missteps, possible corrections someone might throw at you. You're editing your personality in real time. You've lived your whole life like someone standing beneath a spotlight they didn't ask for. A spotlight that doesn't illuminate, it interrogates. This is what growing up with criticism does. It plants a voice inside your mind that comments on everything you do. A voice that doesn't encourage, doesn't soften, doesn't reassure, a voice that watches you. And the truth is, you became so used to that voice that you mistake it for your own. You learned early that one wrong move, one imperfect sentence, one flawed attempt, one clumsy expression could invite the sigh, the eye roll, the lecture, the comparison, or the disappointed silence. So you adapted in the way that children are forced to adapt. You became your own critic just to outrun someone else's. The irony, the tragedy, is this. The hyper self-correction that once protected you from external criticism became the internal criticism you now can't escape. That is the core paradox. The mechanism that kept you safe now keeps you small. The habit that prevented shame now creates shame. The vigilance that once shielded you now suffocates you. No one else sees this. They see someone responsible, mature, detail-oriented, put together, maybe even perfectionistic. They don't see the inner negotiations, the self-comparisons, the micro-panic that flashes in your nervous system every time someone looks at you a second too long. You learned to survive criticism by becoming your own surveillance system. And now, as an adult, you can't turn it off. This video is about that, about the lifelong internal world of someone raised on chronic fault-finding, and how that environment becomes a psychological blueprint for everything you experience today.
There is a grief inside people who grew up with criticism. A grief not of what happened, but of what was never allowed to happen. It's the grief of a self never given room to breathe. When a child is consistently corrected, something subtle and heartbreaking occurs. They stop exploring who they are and start calculating who they must be. Every child begins life with an open shape, fluid, curious, messy, expansive. Criticism forces that shape into a narrow frame. The emotional cost echoes through adulthood as the fear of taking up space, the fear of being misunderstood, the fear of resting, the fear of not being enough, the fear of being too much, the fear of vulnerability, the fear of pleasure that hasn't been earned. Jung once wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." For someone raised on criticism, acceptance feels dangerous. It feels like lowering your guard. It feels like becoming visible in ways that once attracted pain. So, you live in tension. You want to be authentic, but authenticity feels unsafe. You desire closeness, but closeness reveals imperfections. You want to stop overthinking, but overthinking feels like the only thing preventing disaster. You long for rest, but rest triggers guilt. You crave love, but love requires self-trust. This is the emotional cost. You live as both the prisoner and the prison guard. And the heaviest part? Most of this pain is silent, invisible, internal. No one sees you tighten your jaw as you correct yourself mid-sentence. No one sees your heart race when someone looks frustrated. No one sees you rehearse messages before sending them. No one sees you spiral for hours over something that lasted 10 seconds. The cost is real, but it's not permanent.
Growing up with criticism doesn't end in childhood. It becomes a map that guides your adult behavior, often without your awareness. Here's how it manifests. 1. You might over-apologize, not out of guilt, but because apology feels like a preemptive shield against criticism. 2. You might struggle to make decisions. Every choice feels like a test. Every mistake feels like proof of inadequacy. 3. You might become a perfectionist, not because you desire excellence, but because imperfection once cost you emotional safety. 4. You might fear asking for help. You learned that needing support invites judgment, not comfort. 5. You might attract critical people. Your nervous system gravitates toward the familiar, even if the familiar is harmful. 6. You might become hyper-independent. You don't trust others to respond kindly to your imperfections, so you do everything alone. 7. You might rehearse conversations in advance, trying to predict criticisms that might arise. 8. You might shut down during conflict, not because you don't care, but because your nervous system associates conflict with shame. 9. You might become a chronic overachiever, trying to outrun the internal voice that says you're still behind. 10. You might struggle to believe compliments. Your brain filters them as anomalies. They do not match the internal narrative you've been conditioned to believe. Understanding this, these are coping strategies, not traits. You are not naturally anxious, naturally insecure, or naturally overthinking. These behaviors were built, and anything built can be unbuilt. The first step in unlearning is witnessing, not gaslighting yourself, not minimizing your past, not saying it wasn't that bad because others had it worse. The healing begins when you acknowledge, yes, that was my environment, and it shaped me. Awareness is the dismantling of the old blueprint.
Healing from a childhood of criticism isn't about erasing the inner critic. It's about replacing its authority. It's about learning to become someone you've never had, a compassionate witness to your own humanity. Here are the paths toward wholeness. 1. Inner child reparenting. This practice helps you speak to the younger part of yourself, the part that still expects judgment. You learn to offer what you never received: gentleness, patience, warmth, curiosity, softness. You learn to correct without shaming, to guide without controlling, to encourage without comparing. 2. Shadow work. Criticism taught you to hide parts of yourself, your spontaneity, creativity, anger, needs, or imperfections. Shadow work invites those exiled parts back. It says, you deserved to exist, even when you were messy. 3. Choosing softness, not weakness, softness. Softness is the courage to be human again, to make mistakes, to learn with curiosity instead of fear, to let yourself be seen without bracing for impact. 4.
Redefining mistakes. Mistakes are not indictments of character. They are proof you are alive, learning, adapting, evolving. Every time you allow yourself a mistake without punishment, you're rewiring your nervous system towards safety. 5. Creating relationships where you are not inspected. Healing accelerates when you're around people who ask instead of assume, guide instead of judge, collaborate instead of compete, listen instead of correct. These environments teach your nervous system a new truth. I can be myself and still be safe. The philosophical closing. Nietzsche wrote, "Become who you are." For someone raised on criticism, this is not a cliché. It is a lifelong mission. It means peeling away the layers of self-surveillance until you meet the version of you that existed before the criticism, the imaginative, curious, expressive, imperfect self that was never supposed to disappear. You are not here to be flawless. You are here to be whole. And healing from criticism is the slow, powerful return to the self you were always meant to be. If this spoke to you deeply, share it with someone who will understand, and subscribe for more long-form psychological explorations, because you deserve a life where your voice isn't edited by fear, but expressed with softness, courage, and truth. You deserve to inhabit yourself fully.